Hello and welcome to FaithInvest in Conversation. I'm Nana Francois, Director of Membership here at FaithInvest. And we have with us here three guests from the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We have Sister Barbara Staley, General Superior sitting in Rome. We have Gregory Lane, CFO sitting in Chicago. And we have Kayako Lyons, Director of Investments, also sitting in Chicago. And we're delighted to welcome you all here today to talk about why faith and finance matter, why you decided to set up an impact program and how that's going, and what the future holds. I would love to start with you, Sister Barbara, just to speak a little bit about the mission of the sisters and what has really motivated your work, what it is that motivates your work, and how that translates into how you look at finance and investment.
Yeah, thank you. Look, at the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, our mission is to spread the love of God to all the corners of the earth. That's a very simple mission and very broad mission. And anything that we do is a tool and instrumentality of doing that spreading of God's love. And traditionally, for years, our finances were to support the missions, to support the various tools that make that mission happen. So our finances would support schools, or they would support our work with the poor in Swaziland, or they would support our mission in making sure we have enough money to take care of our administration needs, etc. But I came to understand that our finances, our investment portfolio could actually be the mission. It also could be the instrumentality of the mission, not just the support of that instrument. I didn't know much about finances, but certainly when I took office, I was presented with our investment portfolio. We had a couple different portfolio managers, and for a couple years, they would be meeting with me and talking to me continuously about how they were going to grow my principal. And I wasn't worried about growing my principal. Any goods that we have, we call them temporal goods in my world, our investments or our temporal goods are not mine. We are the stewards of those goods. And those goods are to be used for the people of God. And again, in my language, people of God means all the people in the world. They are to be used for their good, not for the security of the Missionary Sisters, not for me building my wealth and building my principal. And I talked to them, and they gave me more and more data. I'm not a finance person, and the more data they gave me, the more static it was. It became less and less understandable to me. And I really recognized that we needed a financial person who understood us, who understood what our mission was, and would guide and direct that, understanding that our goods are for using them, not for creating them and turning them inwardly. And so that was how we went about hiring a chief financial officer, and that person ended up being Greg Lane. Because when you ask what is our mission, what I clearly understand, and we clearly understand, just like all organizations, they name their values. Well, we name what are the characteristics of a missionary of the Sacred Heart. And top of that list is love. And love has many forms and expressions. But also we talk about audacity and generosity. And we need to be generous with the temporal goods we have. We, the Missionary Sisters, can never outdo what God's generosity is. I don't need to be afraid of using my goods on behalf of God's kingdom. That generosity will be repaid. Now, I'm not of the theological group that says if you give $1, God's going to give you $10 back. I'm not talking about a direct return, but clearly God's generosity cannot be outdone. And if we share what we have, then we will be taken care of. And the other thing that was striking to me is all my life, being a social activist and fighting on behalf of the poor, I'm always talking to my wealthier friends and always advocating for fair taxes for the rich, et cetera, and really encouraged them. And then all of a sudden, I realized I was responsible for a certain amount of wealth. And I thought, dear God, and I meant dear God, I don't want to die. And God say to me, and what did you do with your wealth? You who have preached this your entire adult life, and what did you do? You built up your principle. That was the only thing you were worried about. You were only worried about self-preservation. And I don't want to face God and be told that I was only worried about self-preservation, that I was only worried about building my own wealth. And when I say mine, I mean the wealth of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart. I want to be greeted by God and say, well done, my daughter. You shared what you had. You did what was asked of you. And that's what it is, because did I take care of the poor? Did I take care of the orphan? Did I clothe the naked? Did I house the homeless? Did I educate the ignorant? I want to say yes. And in every dimension of our life, not just in those already established institutions that do that are the instrumentality of our mission, but also realizing that the investments themselves are an instrument of the mission.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Sister Barbara. So you mentioned it's that kind of that heart of mission, that wanting to be seen as being generous led to the desire to establish some kind of program. And you mentioned that at one point along the journey, you hired your CFO, your now CFO, Gregory Lane. I'd love to just kind of explore that decision a little bit, the process, the meeting. Gregory, your thoughts as you were coming to join this powerful and audacious mission.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. You know, it's a big question why I joined the Missionary Sisters. There's a short version and a long version. The short version is I was working in a more traditional finance environment, focusing on development finance and Latin American emerging markets. And I was very interested eventually getting into impact investing. And I was recruited into this role. I did not grow up in a Catholic tradition, and I was candid about that. And we started talking. I started learning about Mother Cabrini. I started learning about the Missionary Sisters, and I realized very quickly that their values resonate loudly with mine. I also recognized that I could probably be of great service to the organization, because in my role today, I work across jurisdictions and asset classes and cultures. And so I have a variety of skill sets and experiences that I brought to the Missionary Sisters into this role specifically. The longer version is, I like to say to Sister Barbara that I have these Mother Cabrini moments, and I have them fairly often. So the longer version is, more personal. I grew up, as I said, not in a Catholic faith tradition. I grew up in a privileged position in a New York City suburb, loving family, loving parents. I've had everything that I could ever have wanted. And access to great education, resources, experiences, travel, etc. I lost my parents at a relatively young age, and there's a big part of me that feels like I have not quite an obligation, but just a desire to kind of honor my privilege and my parents and just my place in this world by providing service in a kind of a missionary format. And so I do feel a strong connection and just a kind of an inexplicable desire to participate in the mission that is, the Sisters' mission.
Absolutely, that desire to kind of do more with what you have and to kind of use your privilege for the good. And it must have been fascinating just to see how the values align so strongly.
Oh, yes.
Use your skills. And
Indeed.
You mentioned that you kind of looked across all asset classes and eventually you got to impact. And I'd love to kind of maybe between yourself and Sister Barbara, replay some of the discussions that led to the decision that you needed to bring in extra resources and extra support to really make that impact program happen.
Sure. One of my mandates upon starting was to do impact investing, and impact investing is a very broad it's broadly defined. When we talk about faith-based investing or values-based investing, it's effectively the application of faith and values across the investment continuum. And the investment continuum is very wide, right? We're talking about traditional investing in stocks and bonds to philanthropy and everything in the middle. So I couldn't just go out and do impact investing in quotes, and need to kind of understand, or what does that mean? What does that mean in the context of our organization? What does that mean in terms of our charism, and what the sisters would want to do? And as I was exploring this, I happened to meet Kayoko. She was working at a microfinance organization that we were looking at possibly investing in. We started talking, and it seemed like maybe she could help us kind of figure out and maybe join the journey that we're on, and figure out what in fact it means to the Missionary Sisters to impact invest.
Kayoko, do you want to pick up the other side of that conversation and kind of what drew you in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was a little bit of a just pure coincidence that I was pulled into this one business trip. I historically worked at Microvest, which is a impact investing fund, and I was on their investment team. So I usually didn't meet with prospective investors, but I happened to be on this trip because it was in Chicago, where I'm from, and I was with one of my colleagues who Greg had also reached out to later to kind of ask about resources for building impact investing. And my colleague happened to be on vacation when Greg called him, and he never goes on vacation. So Greg decided to call me. So there was a lot of events that just kind of lined up to make this, I was in the right place at the right time. And frankly, a similar story to Greg. I very much feel aligned with the values of the organization. I had not heard of the organization until I met Greg, but as I learned more and more about Mother Cabrini and the sisters, it resonated quite deeply with me. And Sister Barbara asked me this in my interview, what draws you to this work as opposed to just staying on Wall Street and making a bunch of money? And to me, it stumped me because it seems so obvious to just, you're going to spend your life doing something 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Why wouldn't you do it, trying to help others? And I too have been very fortunate to have supportive parents and a family and a good education. And it's hard for me to contemplate or fathom how anybody could not want to dedicate their lives to helping others when you've grown up in that kind of privileged environment. So yeah, Greg and I continued the conversation, and I joined in 2.5 years ago, and time has flown, but we've done a lot in this short amount of time.
Just to kind of, as we lay the background and start to get into the detail, I'd love to pick up on one or two of your definitions of what it means to be faith consistent or to do faith-based investing. And I'll ask if each of you in turn, but maybe Sister Barbara, I'll start with you, which is, it's very much about finance being an outworking of the heart of the mission, but I'd love to just get a kind of, what is the definition that you have in mind when you think about faith aligned or faith consistent investing?
Well, the interesting thing is, I am not a finance person. I'm a missionary, and by professional training, I'm a social worker. But when I started chewing my dilemma of not wanting to face God and being told that I held on to my wealth and didn't share it with some friends, a friend of mine spoke to me about impact investing, and that, hey, you could do something really big here. You could do something that's really important and lead a way in this. So I understood the concept of this, and I thought, yeah, that's great. And so that's why I moved in that direction and needed the experts and people with the expertise, the professional expertise and training to be able to build that out and to continue to build it out. We've only begun building it out. We traditionally had always for years negatively screened. The Bishops' Conference of the United States, the United States Catholic Bishops' Conference, I think in the 80s, put out things that we should not invest in. And so we certainly complied with that. But I came to understand there's much more than not investing in something. There's something about investing in something that matters to us. and matters and helps us to carry forth missions that are important to us. And so I can choose a company that's neutral as far as morally good or morally bad, and that's fine. There's no problem with that investment. Or I can choose one that resonates with who we are and the gift of the Holy Spirit that has been given to this institute, working with those who are the poorest in the world, working with migrants and refugees, caring about the earth, etc. And so it seemed that that's the way we needed to go. So for me, that's the definition of faith-based investing, is looking for alignment that helps to carry forth the expression of the gospel that we have. You know, the gospel gets expressed in more way, in infinite amount of ways. We have a particular way of expressing and living out that gospel. And so it was, how do we align and how do we more effectively and efficiently use our goods on behalf of those things?
Thank you very much, Sister Barbara. And Greg, I will pass it across to you and maybe just throw in a question here around kind of, do you see a significant difference maybe in the intensity between so-called values investing that's been around in the secular world for some time and what it means when you start to overlay or put in a faith lens and that mission lens?
Yes and no. I think this whole notion of faith-based investing or values-based investing is very investor specific. So, as I mentioned before, you're talking about, applying a faith-based or value-based lens across the investment continuum. And, in my role as CFO, I'm thinking about the entire global portfolio and the purposes of portions of that portfolio, which includes helping to support sisters and our ministries. And so, it really depends on where you are along the continuum. And, we have some space to be highly impactful and have a really high risk tolerance and care less about generating financial return. And therefore we can really strive for high impact and really charismatically aligned impact. So the easy answer, or the cop-out, is that it depends.
It depends. But as you say, it's about the heart of the mission, driving what it is that you want to do. Maybe, Keiko, I'll throw it across to you and also just add a question that as we've gathered here together to have the conversation, both what is the definition and why do you feel now is the time to kind of share the story of where you've gotten to in your 2.5 years and what comes next?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Sister Barbara and Greg said about definitions. I do think that impact investing, as we define it, and I know there's a lot of jargon in the sector, but we define it as private investments that have the explicit goal of supporting some sort of environmental or social outcome. And in terms of faith-based investing, I think Sister Barbara said it far better than I ever could. But in terms of what does it look like compared to some of the other values-aligned, more secular investing, I do think there are some overlaps, and sometimes the language I find is just different. So for example, in the Catholic world, we talk about care for creation. In the secular world, they interpret that this is environmentally friendly investment. Or we talk about in the Catholic Church, dignity for all humankind. Maybe the secular world looks at that through a lens of what is the livable wage that the company we are investing in is charging. So there's a lot of overlap. And I think people try to separate it sometimes and think that it's different, but there is a lot of shared values and goals. In terms of your second question about why now is the time to share our story, there is so much going on in the world right now. I mean, there are so many crises, COVID being one of them, climate change, inequality, massive migration. It feels like now more than ever, we need to do something and change the way that our capitalistic system works. And I think that there's a lot of, at least from my vantage point, it feels like there's some momentum right now. And it feels like a lot of people are talking about this, particularly younger generations as well. I think people want new solutions, a new paradigm. Business as usual has not been good for society and been good for the planet. And so I think there's a lot of momentum right now. And I think it's imperative that we share our tiny piece of knowledge and experience with others, particularly in the Catholic Church. Feels like there's a lot of conversation going around about that we have a moral imperative to do this, as Sister Barbara said, as stewards of our wealth. But there's a lot of people who might not know how to tactically engage in it. So that's what we're hoping, that sharing our story will help another organization.
Absolutely. I mean, Sister Barbara, Gregory, if there's anything you want to add to that kind of motivation for why now?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than look at part of this as being opportunistic. You know, you see that something is working, and so then you keep going. And if the charism, the spirit of the Missionary Sisters is to spread God's love, part of that is helping other people to spread God's love. So I want to get the good news out about what impact investing is. Many religious congregations, as you may be aware, are really, really poor and really live hand to mouth. But I know there are lots of other congregations that do have investments. I know that there are a lot of my good friends that are wealthy that have investment portfolios. So if I can influence them in the same way that my friend influenced me and said, hey, you ought to think about doing this, that's what I would like to do. So part of it's opportunistic, and as the momentum is growing, to be part of that momentum and contribute to it.
Thank you so much, Sister Barbara. So Greg and Kayoko, now I'm going to ask to get into a little bit of the detail and the nuts and bolts of how do you actually go about setting up an impact investment program?
So as I mentioned, we have a responsibility to manage and oversee the sisters' investment portfolio. And first and foremost, I need to be sure that the sisters' needs are taken care of. And so we start at a pretty high level strategically, and determine what are the various uses and sizes and risk return profiles of different portfolios and pools of capital, and responding to the needs of our congregation. And then from there, you integrate values in the kind of the public markets. As Sister Barbara mentioned, it's striving to integrate positive ESG, environmental social governance standards, refining your negative screening, and then starting to maybe replace some of the public equities or alternatives with what we would call institutional quality impact funds, whether it's sort of financial inclusion or climate related. And then what we did is we identified a portion of the global portfolio that could have more flexibility.
Yeah, and just to kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of what we did once we did carve out that portion where we said this can have a little bit higher risk tolerance, more of a capital preservation mandate. I was coming into a blank slate, so we didn't have any infrastructure, policies, procedures. We had nothing. And so my first inclination was, let's build all that first. Let's get a policy, let's get our scoring tools, let's plan all of this out. And I got a little bit of pushback from Sister Barbara. She very much recognizes the value of having that foundational infrastructure and systems, but she said, don't let it cripple you. Be bold. We still want to do some things. So I really appreciated those words, because it allowed me to start making investments as we were building the infrastructure. So, the first year was a lot of policies, procedures, landscape surveying, just sharing a lot of pipeline that I was getting, a lot of investable opportunities with internal stakeholders to say, does this seem right? Does this seem right? To try to calibrate geographically, sector-wise, asset class, what were we trying to focus on? And then in the end, we ultimately decided, the focus is on the beneficiaries. We're somewhat sector and geographically agnostic. We want to reach the most vulnerable populations and support them if we can with impact investments, recognizing that sometimes they're too vulnerable and they need humanitarian donation assistance, and impact investing has limits. So yeah, the first year was really just about doing a few low-hanging fruit investments while building all of the infrastructure. We relied heavily on partners. I really have to give credit to a lot of the women religious organizations that have been doing this for decades. Sister Corrine Florig, the Adrian Dominicans, she helped a ton. Mercy helped. Franciscan Sisters of Mary. There's a whole ecosystem, and they're very supportive and helped us kind of lay the foundation while we still did a few investments here and there. And then in the second year, that's when we started to get a little bit more focused, and we really refined our thesis and are spending much more time focusing on migrant populations in the impact investing portfolio. So yeah, it was a little bit of building and investing at the same time, which may feel a bit untraditional to some other impact investors, but I think it worked well for us.
Absolutely. And it's good to know that it's possible to do both in parallel and to succeed in both in parallel. Now, Sister Barbara, I want to ask you, you mentioned that you're not a finance specialist, but obviously the sisters have huge influence in terms of how the money is used, the mission, almost the investment committee or the ethical overlay. I'd love to know how you continued to interact and work with Kayoko and Greg as they started to make those first investments to come to you with questions.
Look, there's constant conversation that goes on, but I would take a step back about that, about how the conversation goes. When we hired Greg and then Kayoko, there are thousands of people that have equal to, or if not better, credentials than they have in their positions. Although these two folks are very highly credentialed and capable. But what was important was to find a fit, somebody who wanted to be not a missionary sister of the Sacred Heart, but wanted to be a missionary of the Sacred Heart. So finding the right fit of people to work for you is key to having any success. We were blessed by getting two people who resonated with who we were, desire to learn more. Every day they're looking for opportunities. How do they deepen their understanding of what we call the charism, our spirit, our values, our mission? They're continually on their own personal journey of strengthening that, as well as we provide certain opportunities, etc. That's part of the answer to that.
That's almost the foundation, which
absolutely. You got to make sure you have fit. And I think I can't overestimate that. Then in the process, I go back to Kayoko. She wanted to have everything all lined up, and I'm like, just do it, please, just do it. And I know they aren't accustomed to people saying, just do it, and then we'll worry about it. Because look, as we do it, then we understand better what the infrastructure is that we need, and we understand better what the tools are that we need, and we understand better what it is that we're doing. But Kayoko particularly started building instruments that we would score. Does this align with who you are? Where do we want to put emphasis? And we chewed on that, and we continue to chew on it, and we continue to deepen our understanding of that. But I actually love those instruments. I love measurement and evaluation and metrics regarding something, but they provide me with those metrics, and they provide me with enough information as a non-professional in the field to feel comfortable as the executive director to say, yeah, go forward. I trust what you're doing, or oh, let's tweak this a little bit. But there's a constant organic process that's involved in that. Obviously, they don't bother me about a bunch of details and little things that I don't need to be worrying about, but there's constant back and forth in conversation.
Greg, I'd just like to ask, in the context of learning and building at the same time, and just looking back in the past 2.5 years, what have been either your greatest joys in terms of investment or your greatest times of relief that something that you've experimented on has actually worked? I'd love to just get a sense of milestones or key moments in the journey so far.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to admit, I know it sounds a little bit corny, but I think I just love the journey. The way that we looked at impact investing 2 years ago is different from how we approach it and think about it today. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be very different in 2 years. So, and Kayoko's, don't be shocked, could change a little bit. So I think having the freedom, we've had a lot of runway. Sister Barbara has faith in us, and we have faith in ourselves and the journey that we're on. And so I guess if you could say anything sort of a relief, it's sort of being, getting to a point where we Kayoko and I can say, all right, let's trust in the journey, and that, it's all going to kind of move along as it should.
Kayoko, greatest joy or greatest relief, or one of each?
I would, similar to Greg, I don't have a moment in time that was the greatest joy, but I think holistically, honestly, learning from the sisters and being pushed by comments like Sister Barbara to just go do it, be bold, be audacious. I think that that's really important. And it again, I think it reflects some of the bigger picture conversations that are happening in the finance world. I think a lot of this mentality of looking at your finances and your wealth from a place of abundance instead of a place of scarcity, and learning to think about things from an impact first perspective as opposed to a finance first perspective has just been really personally and obviously professionally transformative for me. I didn't realize how many ingrained and entrenched ways of thinking about finance and risk I come with, because I started my career in, commercial bank credit training at JP Morgan, which you are taught to look for every single solid risk. And it's been quite freeing to kind of think about financial systems in a different way. And this doesn't mean to say that we're going crazy and taking all kinds of risk. And, we've balanced audacity with systems and process, and starting small and starting with what we know, meaning we've done a lot more debt than equity. We haven't invested massive portions of our investment portfolio in very high risk deals. We're doing this in a prudent but bold way. And I think learning how to do that and being influenced by the sisters and our charism has been my biggest joy in this role. And I can't think of a relief that I've had necessarily. I've honestly enjoyed it the whole time, so nothing to be relieved from.
Thank you. I would like to draw out of this maybe been any particular experience of really seeing the impact with the beneficiaries or recipients, some decision we've made, some place you've been, some partnership you've made that's really made you feel it was good that we did this.
I can start with one and then I'll see if the others have anything to add. I think one of the most impactful investments we've done, and this speaks to the boldness, and we've highlighted as an example in the FaithInvest paper, is investing in Freedom 100, which is a fund run by Mission Driven Finance and Freedom for Immigrants that posts bond for immigrants that are held in detention facilities in the US, so that they can be released from what are in essence private prisons and wait their asylum trials with their friends and family. It was a long tenured, it's 7 years plus investment. And at the time we didn't have a policy for this. And so we had originally said we're going to aim to have shorter tenured loans as we learn and develop the program. And I brought it to Sister Barbara and she just was like, just go do it. Like, people are sitting in these detention facilities. Like, if we can help free even 1 or 2 people, just go do it. And I think this one is such a great example because, I mean, it's so profound for an individual to get their freedom and not be held in captivity for trying to seek a better life. But it also speaks to the mindset that the sisters have that I think isn't always present in impact investment broadly, this idea of scale, right? The pilot program, the whole program is just $1 million facility. They're trying to free 100 people. And to a lot of folks, they'll say that's just 100 people, that's too small. But each person's life matters. If it was me in that facility, I don't want to sit there without my family. And so I think bringing that notion of deep transformative impact as opposed to just fixating on scale at all costs is something that I think is pretty joyful in the work that we do.
Thank you very much for that, Coco. It's really a good illustration of what a difference it can make to have mission-focused impact. So as we draw to a close, I'd like to perhaps just start with you, Sister Barbara, and ask, what does the future hold? What does the future look like? What excites you about the prospects for the next 2.5 or 20.5 years that we have ahead of us in terms of this journey?
From the position that I sit in, et cetera, one of the realities of religious life of Catholic sisters in most of the developed world, and true pretty much throughout, is that there's a diminishing amount of sisters. But by doing impact investing, our reach is far greater today with fewer sisters than we were 5 years ago. So our reach, keeps becoming greater, and we keep being able to spread God's love in wider universes. And that's what my life is about. That's what our organization is about. And this seems like a good tool, a good instrument, not just the tool to make it, but the actual instrument of implementing that. And a lot of things we can do real fast, and other things take the long time. There's a little bit of an inside joke between Kayoko and I. It's like, God, stop being so obsessive compulsive. Just do it. But the piece of me that loves that is it gives me the confidence that the real due diligence has been done. So that I can tease about not fretting so much, because I know so much fretting has been done. and that's a nice play in between, And the other thing of that is just beyond the impact investing is also broadening our own philanthropy. Certain things that we've invested in posting bond for these immigrants, well, maybe we may not get that back. Greg referred to his growing up. My mother always taught me, if you loan somebody money, do it as if you're giving it to them. And never worry about if you get it back or not, because then you're never going to be upset. And I believe that today. We're giving what we have. And if we get it back, that's great. If we don't, God bless the people that benefited and great. So we've got to just be free and hold lightly what is ours. And do the best we can using all the expertise and the intellectual capital that's available and best practices. But in the end, we've got to hold it lightly and not let those things inhibit us, but allow those things to inform us and free us to do better.
Sister Barbara, thank you so much. Kayoko, Greg, I'll invite you to share any kind of closing thoughts and words.
Yeah, there are a lot of things I'm excited about. I think we're at the very beginning of this journey, not only Kayoko and I and Sister Barbara in our roles as missionaries of the Sacred Heart, but also as part of this kind of global effort and the way stewards of capital are starting to think, and there's a lot of momentum, and I think that's really exciting. One of the things that excites me is when you analyze any kind of investment historically, you look at risk and return, and we've incorporated or integrated this impact piece. So risk, return, impact, and so really kind of developing the impact portion of the methodology and applying that across asset classes and ministries and social enterprises, et cetera. I'm really excited about how that could develop. And then, the last thing I would say is just that there's a real opportunity for us. We found, I didn't know it when I started, but we have been able to catalyze other faith-based investors. And so this, ability to kind of evangelize, talk about what we're doing and encourage others to do it and move faith-based assets or temporal goods into positive impact. And there's a huge opportunity set there. So that really excites me.
Very exciting prospects, both the scaling, as Sister Barbara says, and the catalyzing others. Kayoko, any thoughts from you? Any kind of near-term excitements, things you're looking forward to?
Yeah, just echo what Sister Barbara and Greg said. I'm excited for the next phase of our journey as we do look to go deeper, to be even more impactful, to be even more creative, to really try to go where others do not go, and support structures that maybe traditional investors wouldn't want to do, but they still need money. And yeah, also excited to continue to try to build the sector, because as I said, I got a lot of support from the folks in the space that have been doing this for decades, and we're paying it forward. And so my final word will be, if anybody's listening to this video and has questions or wants help, we're always happy to share our tools and ideas and share what we know in our piece of this with others who are interested in doing it as well.
On that note, thank you all very much for your time today. And thanks everyone for listening to Faith Invest in Conversation with the Missionary Sisters today.
Thank you for having us.